He regulated. It did not initiate, it was there, it existed, but it regulated. And however, yes, some of the regulations include freeing slaves in return to compensate for perhaps some punishments that we have done, right? It's called a kafara, right? If you have done something wrong, in order to free yourself from the punishment, you have to, for example, to free a slave. Right? That is one thing. But as we talk also, inshallah, and we're going to see in the next few chapters, the beautiful and amazing manners that had to do with slaves, right? And then if you think about the Western world, how they treat a slave on the other hand, you'll see quite a huge difference. And I wish that inshallah, we learn as much and apply this in a way that if you look at it, if we are ordered to treat the slaves in this manner, right, then it is more of a priority and more of a right to treat, for example, our spouses and children even better. So we're going to start, inshallah, with Bab Al-Afw Al-Khadim, the chapter of pardoning or forgiving the servant. Now, the purpose of this chapter is to indicate or talk about that the master would pardon the servant if the servant had done something that is inappropriate or wrong, especially if he's a young servant, a child. So this hadith is narrated by Abi Umama قال أقبل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم معه غلامان. So the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم had come. Abu Umama says the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم had come and he had غلامان. Now ghulam in the Arabic language can refer to the child who's almost at the age of puberty. And so this is around the age perhaps 12, 11, this is considered a ghulam, 10 years old. But it also can refer to the male who's a servant, a slave. It's also called a ghulam. So the Prophet ﷺ had come with two ghulams, فَوَهَبَ أَحَدُهُمَا لِعَلِيٍّ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُ. So he had given one to Ali رضي الله عنه, وقال, he said, لَا تَضْرِبْهُ فَإِنِّي نُهِيتُ عَنْ ضَرْبِ أَهْلِ الصَّلَاةِ وَإِنِّي رَأَيْتُهُ يُصَلِّي مُنْذُ أَقْبَلَهُ. And so he gave one to Ali and he said, do not hit him, for verily I was ordered not to hit the ones who pray. And since I have come, I have witnessed him praying. So the Prophet ﷺ over here for this hadith indicates that this guy, this probably person was at puberty, and so it's talking about a slave. And so the Prophet ﷺ over here showed an immediate right. Right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered the Prophet ﷺ to honor the ones who pray. They're honorable in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they should not be hit. Now this is in a slave. What about a free person? What about your friend? What about your spouse and so forth? وَأَعْطَى أَبَا ذَرَّ غُلَامًا. And the other one he gave to Abu Dharr, وَقَالَ اسْتَوْصِ بِهِ مَعْرُوفًا. And he said, take good care of him, or be dutiful to him, or be good to him. فَأَعْتَقَ. So what did Abu Dharr do? He released him. فَقَالَ. So the Prophet ﷺ at one time had come, right, and he talked to Abu Dharr. He said, مَا فَعَلَ. Right, when he heard that, he's asking about the servant, how did you do, what did he do? So Abu Dharr, he said, أَمَرْتَنِي أَنْ أَسْتَوْصِ بِهِ خَيْرًا فَأَعْتَقْتُ. He said, you ordered me to be dutiful and good to him, so I set him free. And in reality, this is the epitome, the highest level of being good to somebody. So Abu Dharr over here took it to heart and tried to do the best that he can to obey the advice of the Prophet ﷺ. Now one interesting thing from this you can take is, subhanAllah, the mercy of the Prophet ﷺ, that he used to, as they say, yutaba, right, to follow up with the Sahaba. He would even follow up with the slaves and ask how are they doing. This is how the Prophet ﷺ was as a leader of a community. He would take care of his community members. He would ask upon them. Quite often he would, for example, he would pray, turn around and inspect the crowd, find one of them that usually sees in prayer not there, and he would ask what happened to him. Right? If he's sick, he would gather some of the Sahaba and he would go and visit him. Over here in this case, he was asking about a slave, even a slave. This is the mercy of our religion. This is the mercy of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, from this hadith, as I mentioned, you can take from it as honoring the person who prays and being good to the servant and not even striking him. Right? So, which also means that he has done a mistake, you should it's better to pardon him. And this is the relation with the chapter that we're talking about. It's the chapter of Al-Af, Al-Khadim, pardoning or forgiving the servant. So if he says don't hit him, which means if he does something wrong, then it's more appropriate to forgive him. The following hadith is عن أنس قال قدم النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم المدينة وليس له خادم. Now, by the way, over here, the word khadim, servant, can refer either to a slave or a person who's not a slave, just a person who serves you. And Anas was the khadim of the Prophet ﷺ. He was a servant, but although he was not a slave. Okay. So Anas ibn Malik is saying, when the Prophet ﷺ had come, وَلَيْسَ لَهُ خَادِمٌ, he did not have a servant to serve him. فَأَخَذَ أَبُو طَلْحَ بِيَدِهِ. Abu Talha is his stepfather. He said, he took my hand. So he's the husband of Anas. فَانْطَلَقَ بِي. He went with me, he took me, حَتَّى أَدْخَلَنِي عَلى النَّبِيِّ صلى الله عليه وسلم, until he entered with me to the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. And now Anas was about 10 years old at this time. فَقَالْ يَا نَبِيَّ اللَّهِ. He said, O Messenger of Allah, إِنَّ أَنَسًا غُلَامٌ كَيِّسٌ لَبِيبٌ. Anas is a boy, غُلام. So at the age of 10, we said غُلام can be referred to a person who's approaching puberty. He said غُلام, he's a young boy. لَبِيب, كَيِّسٌ لَبِيب, he's smart. Right? And he has a good mind and aptitude. He's intelligent. He's clever. فَلْيُخْدِمْكَ. Let him serve you. So the Prophet ﷺ accepted. فقال أنس رضي الله عنه فخادمته في السفر والحضر مقدمه المدينة. So I served him since he has come to Medina in travel and while staying in Medina. So it means he was with him all the time. حتى توفي, until he passed away. So how many years was this? Since he came to Medina until he died? How many years? From the time he came to Medina until the Prophet ﷺ passed away. How many years were those? 13. 13 years old. So Anas ibn Malik served him since he was 10 until he was 23. Okay. And in that time period, he said, Anas is describing, he said, ما قال لي شيء صنعته لما صنعت هذا أو لما صنعت هذا هكذا ولا قال لي شيء لم أصنعه ألا صنعت هذا هكذا. So Anas ibn Malik is describing in that entire period, he has not said anything to me regarding something I was ordered to do that I have done. Why did you do it this way? Referring if he has done it in the wrong way. Or why did you not do it? Or why you did not do something, for example. Okay. And so over here, the Prophet ﷺ is indicating the treatment of the khadim. Now, if you notice, all these things are associated with more of a worldly matter. When the Prophet ﷺ would ask him, for example, go do this for me, right? And he has done it inappropriately, he does not scold him. And remember one of the incidents, the Prophet ﷺ had ordered him to go do something. And then Anas went outside and he saw the children playing, so he started playing with them. And he essentially forgot and he delayed, so the Prophet ﷺ was worried, so he went out. And the Prophet ﷺ, right, did not increase and say more than Anas. Right? Didn't I send you to do something? And that was it. Then he did not go beyond that. And so this indicates that the Prophet ﷺ would pardon him even if he would do errors. Now this, of course, is associated with the worldly things, not things, for example, that are religiously, for example, that is haram. So if Anas would fall into haram, of course, the Prophet ﷺ would instruct him. The Prophet ﷺ does not remain quiet on something that that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be displeased with. That is not his manner and his character, and is not befitting of a prophet to do such a thing. So this hadith can be taken regarding matters of the worldly things. And so essentially it's referring to perhaps, Wallahu a'lam, that it's preferable if a servant would make an error in worldly things that are associated with you. He spilled the water on the ground, he dropped the food, he burnt the food, or he did not clean things appropriately, then it's better to scold him or forgive him. Forgive him, right? Not even hit him. We're not talking about hitting over here. Right? This is even just beyond, like, further than that. Right? Now the following chapter Imam Bukhari had followed is Bab Al-Khadim Yudnib, the chapter of the servant, right, committing a sin or doing something wrong. So essentially what it means, the Imam Bukhari wants to relate is how do you punish a servant if he makes a mistake, right? Or if he sins? So this hadith is narrated عن نقيط بن صبرة قال انتهيت إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ودفع الراعي في المراحي سخلا. So Naqit ibn Sabra, he went to the Prophet ﷺ, perhaps he was visiting, and he was describing that the Ra'i, the one who herds the sheep, has come in at night, and he's bringing the herd with him to place them in the barn where they're going to stay, or in the surrounded area where they're going to sleep for the night. And he had a sakhila. A sakhila is a newborn lamb. Okay? فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا تحسبن ولم تقل لا تحسبن. So he said, the Prophet ﷺ said, do not suppose or do not assume. Now there's an addition in Abi Dawud that explains this. He says, do not suppose that we have ordered its butchering, right, for you. So what happened was that the sakhina, when the Prophet ﷺ saw the herder come in with a newborn baby, he had ordered him to sacrifice one of the other, one of the other sheep, to butcher it so that they would eat it. And usually it's the tradition of the Arabs, if they have a guest, it's part of being generous, that you perhaps feed him. So he was telling this man, right, do not think or do not suppose we did this for you. Right? Now the reason being, and he explained, he said, إِنَّ لَنَا غَنَمًا مِئَةً لَا نُرِيدُ أَن تَزِيدَ فَإِذَا جَاءَ الرَّاعِي بِسَخِنَ ذَبَحْنَاهَا مَكَانَهَا شَاءَ. He said, we have 100 of these sheep, and we don't want them to increase. So every time the sheep herder comes in with a newborn, instead of it, we butcher them. Is that clear? Now the reason Prophet ﷺ said, do not think that we're doing this for you, is perhaps one of two reasons. Is that he did not want to make his guest, the Laqit, to feel that he is burdening the Prophet ﷺ. He does not want him to feel that he is burdening the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ is going out of hand in order to do something for his guests. But also perhaps it could be from the humbleness of the Prophet ﷺ, that he did not want his guest to think that the Prophet ﷺ is doing something that in reality he's not. So he did not want him to think, listen, I'm not doing this for you, don't think I'm doing this for you. Because in reality perhaps he was not. And so this is out of his humbleness to not overthink something that is not true. And so then the Prophet ﷺ, this hadith of Laqit, this is the part that we're interested in. He said, فَكَانَ فِي مَا قَالَ, and among what he has said, لا تضرب ضعينتك كضرب أمتك وإذا استنشقت فبالغ إلا أن تكون صائما. And he said, do not hit, do not strike. ضعينتك is referring to your wife. ضعينة is referring to your wife. كضربك أمتك, the way you strike your servants, okay, your slave. وإذا استنشقت فبالغ, and if you put water in your nostrils, فبالغ, exaggerate. إلا أن تكون صائما, except if you are fasting, don't do this. Now the part we are concerned about is do not hit your spouse, your wife, your significant other, in a similar way that you hit your slave. Now there's many things we take from this. First, the permissibility of striking the slave, right, the servant, for any reason. Just like that, I don't feel good today, I'm going to strike my servant. Huh? He's not doing his job. Over here, the chapter is talking about what? Slave, if he commits a sin. Right? If he commits a sin, we have to understand this. Because essentially Islam legislates striking for what reason? When we strike a child, why are we striking him? Disciplining, right? So over here, the permissibility of disciplining, right, that you strike. Now there was regulation for this, that the type of strike that happened is the one that leaves no mark. Is that clear, everyone? Now what is interesting, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, do not hit your wife in a similar manner that you hit your servant. So if you're already, lightly striking, showing discontent, scolding in this manner for the servant, for the spouse, it has to be even less. it has to be even less. So what kind of strike are we talking about? Essentially, it's a very disciplinary form, a form that indicates your discontent, and it's more of an emotional thing as opposed to a physical harm that you're exhibiting. And we have to realize this, because sometimes, unfortunately, the non-Muslims take the verse from the Quran and they take it and they say, look, without looking at the Sunnah. And sometimes even, unfortunately, some of the Muslims apply this incorrectly. Right? And from this hadith, we can take that as a lesson from it or an indication from it. But it also indicates the permissibility, essentially, of doing this, of striking the khadim if he had committed a sin. And the next couple of chapters over here, we're going to take, there's about a hadith per each that describes this even more specifically. In fact, it's kind of interesting. The condition, the reason I'm saying is that it has to do only when he sins, is because the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned later on this during their relations, that if you unjustly strike your servant, then you should free him. If you unjustly strike your servant, then you should free him as a kafar. Many of the scholars say it's not mandatory, but this is what we're talking about over here. So the striking or the discipline should be only done in a certain category. And it has to do with sinning or making mistakes. Now the following chapter also has to do with the manners of how we treat our servants, but it also can be taken to our children too. So this has to do with باب ختم ما على خادمه مخافة سوء الظن, the chapter of sealing, right, something before you give it to your servant out of the fear of thinking ill of them, thinking bad of them. Now what this is referring to is when it has to do with transactions, perhaps. So the hadith over here is on Abi al-Aliyah, and this is one of the tabi'een. He said, كُنَّا نُؤْمَرُ أَن نَخْتِمَ عَلَى الْخَادَمِ وَنَكِيلُ وَنَعُدُّهَا كراهية أن يتعودوا خلق سوء أو يظن أحدنا ظن السوء أو يظن أحدنا ظن السوء. So Abu al-Aliyah is saying that we used to be ordered. So he's a tabi'i, right? Tabi'i is following the generation of Sahaba. He said we used to be ordered. Who are they ordered with? By whom? Or from whom? Who are, so he's saying the former Sabiqeen, which are who? The Sahaba. So the Tabi'een, this Tabi'een is saying we were ordered, we used to be ordered by whom? From the Sahaba. This is to practice. To do what? And نَخْتِمَ عَلَى الْخَادِمِ. So, وَنَكِيلُ وَنَعُدَّهَا. So if you have, for example, a bag, they have money in it, then you seal it. If you're going to tell him, go buy something, you say, listen, here is, for example, $10. 1, 2, 3, and you count it for him, right? So this does two things. The servant knows how much he has. He knows that you know how much you have. Okay? So he took it, so there's information between both. Or when you give him something and it's an envelope, it is sealed. And you know you sealed it. And you give it to him. And you tell him, right? He sees it sealed. Now what does this do? And also when you weigh something, right? Here I'm going to send 2 kilograms of apples. Here, wait, here, look, 2 kilograms, take it. Drop it off to the grandmother, right? Now what this does, it does quite a few things. It keeps away the waswasa, right? Or the doubt that you might have something wrong when it happened. If you're in a doubtful servant, it removes eliminates all the doubt. But it also disciplines you not to have this doubt. But it also disciplines the servant and keeps him away from the ill manners. Because generally, the bad manners can be gained through practice. And this is, once again, we can practice with our children. If you count, for example, money for your children and tell them, here, look, this is $1, $2, $3, $4, $5, go and do something. And when he comes back, how much was it? And you count change. This does not leave room for the servant or your child to perhaps, if it happens that he desires this money, that he would take it. Because if he does it once, he will do it second, a third, and a fourth. It becomes a habit, then this is ta'awwada su'al khuluq. He got used to bad manners. Right? So this is how they used to do in order to prevent themselves from having doubt, and also to prevent the servant from gaining bad manners. Now the following chapter is also indicating from the Sahaba, right? باب من عد على خادمه مخافة الظن. The ones, he's naming ones who have done this, right? Steal for the khadam, the servant, because they worry that they would have bad ideas or they have misconceptions about them. So this is An Salman, so this is referring to Salman al-Farisi. Now this is Sahabi. Initially we were talking about a tabi'i. He said we used to be instructed, which is referring to Sahaba. This confirms it. So this is Salman al-Farisi. He said, قال إني لأعد العراق على خادمي. I used to count the meated bones. An iraq is a bone that has meat on it. Sometimes it's eaten from it, sometimes it's not. The difference between these scholars linguistically. But we'll say it's a piece of like boned meat. A steak, a bone steak, for example. على خادمي, I count it. Right? When I give it, I would count here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Take it, right? مخافة الظن, out of the fear that I would have bad intent, like bad ideas about it, or misconceptions about it, or doubts about it. Did he take away from it? Did he not? But one of the things that Islam had also legislated, in order to cut off the reasons that would make a servant, for example, steal, is that Islam has ordered that we feed the servant from what we eat. We clothe him from what we clothe ourselves. Now sometimes he even encouraged that you make them sit at the same table. If not, then at least feed them from what they cook. Because you can realize that they're sitting the entire day cooking for you, and then the food gets put. Of course he feels that the desire to want to eat this. And it's from the manners and the etiquette of Islam to go as far as to fulfill their needs and give them from this food. Allah is our religion is beautiful in terms of manners, and this is even with once again, somebody who's considered a slave, a belonging that belongs to you. Right? But Islam has also not put away that they are also human beings. They have feelings, they have needs, and so forth. Now the following chapter is Al-Adab Al-mufrad. I think we might end with this. Al-Adab Al-mufrad, the chapter of disciplining the servant. So it's referring to the permissibility of doing it and how you're doing it. And now this is what I was talking about before, is that you do not do it in a hurtful way, except if he has committed something that is perhaps haram. Okay? Now there's two narrations on this hadith. We're going to end by them inshallah, and you're going to see the difference between them. عن يزيد بن عبد الله بن قصيد قال أرسل عبد الله بن عمر غلاما له بذهب أو بورق. So Abdullah ibn Umar, the Yazid ibn Abdullah ibn Qusayd, saying that Abdullah ibn Umar had sent a boy that belongs to be khadam, a servant, بذهب أو ورق. He sent him with gold or silver coins. فصرفه. So the reason he had sent him is in order to exchange one for the other. So he either had gold and wanted to exchange it for silver, or he had silver coins and wanted to exchange it for gold. Now what this servant has done is فصرفه, so he did this, but what he did was فأنظر في الصرف. He had delayed taking it. Anzar, which is delayed taking it. And now in Islam this is not permissible. It's not permissible to exchange gold for silver without taking it on the spot. Is that clear to everybody? If you're going to exchange money, dollars for example, US dollars to Canadian dollars or to euros, it has to be on the spot. It cannot be, here, take this and give it to me the other day. This is considered riba. This is a form of riba. It's not allowed. Okay? So you have to do it in the spot, in the same sitting. Now the Prophet literally said hand to hand, but it does not necessarily mean here type of deal, right? But it means in the same sitting. Wallahu a'lam. Here, take, give me back, without leaving and deferring it. However, what the slave has done is that he committed riba. And riba, of course, is a minor sin. Is that right? You agree? Riba is a minor sin? لا يا شيخ. Riba is a major sin. Riba is a major, it's a kabira. Right? You guys are asleep. If I say something wrong, don't follow me, okay? So riba is a major sin. So this slave has committed a huge major sin. Okay? And he came back to Abdullah ibn Umar. فَرَجَعَ إِلَيْهِ. So Abdullah ibn Umar was like, this is the major sin, what have you done? So what did he do? He punished him. فَجَلَدَهُ وَجِعًا. He whipped him and he hurt him, he made him feel the pain of the whip. وَقَالَ اذهب. Go. فَخُذْ الَّذِي لِي وَلَا تَصْرِفْهُ. Take back what belongs to me and do not, exchange, do that exchange. So which means come back. Now over here, when we're talking about the hadith before, of forgiving and not striking, over here now it becomes clear that it does not have to do with hudud, or sins, or if it has to do with the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's better perhaps to do this, because once again the person will remember, oh wait, I remember what happened to me last time, I'm never going to do this again. Okay? So Darb al-Khadim, on this is a major sin. So it indicates the permissibility. It's not mandatory, by the way. We're talking about permissibility. Okay? The permissibility of striking, right, the slave in a manner that would make him feel pain if he deserves it. And this is in the area of committing major sins. In the area of committing major sins. Now the following chapter, the following hadith, you realize something that's a bit different now. Now this is عن أبي مسعود قال كنت أضرب غلاما لي. Right? Abi Mas'ud was saying, I was striking a ghulam, right, a servant that I had. فَسَمِعْتُ مِنْهُ خَلْفِي. I heard a sound from behind me. صَوْتًا اعلم أبا مسعود. No, Aba Mas'ud. لَاللَّهُ أَقْدَرُ عَلَيْكَ لَاللَّهُ أَقْدَرُ عَلَيْكَ مِنْكَ عَلَيْهِ. So while he was striking the servant, he heard a voice from behind him say, no, Aba Mas'ud, verily that Allah, right, is more, has more ability over you to do things than you have on the servant. So he says, Ibn Mas'ud, فَالْتَفَتْتُ, I look behind me, فَإِذَا هُوَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. That it is the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. قُلْتُ يَا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حُرٌّ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ. Immediately on the spot. In another narration, the hadith said that whatever he was using, the whip fell on the ground when he saw the Prophet ﷺ out of the hayba, how do you describe hayba? I want to say fear, but it's a bit more than this. Right? The hayba of the Prophet ﷺ. He dropped on the ground. So he said, O Messenger of Allah, he is free for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet ﷺ responded, he says, أَمَا وَلَمْ تَفْعَلْ لَمَسَّتْكَ النَّارُ أَوْ لَنَفَحَتْكَ النَّارُ. If you would have not done this, then the fire would have touched you, or would have afflicted you, meaning that it would have afflicted you and burned you and changed your color. Now if you notice over here in the first hadith we saw Abdullah ibn Umar clearly striking the servant. In this one, the Prophet ﷺ is saying, don't strike him. And he said, in fact, you'll be punished by hellfire if you would have not freed him, which means that this is a minor sin. Is that right? You go to hellfire because of minor sins? It's a major sin. So in this hadith, striking your servant is a major sin. So how do you match this though? Over here, Abdullah ibn Umar was striking a servant. Was he committing major sin? You're saying yes, right?
The servant did a major sin.
So the servant did a major sin. So what is the difference between both situations? Over here, Abi Mas'ud, when he was striking the servant, the Prophet ﷺ said, if you had not have freed him, then fire would have touched you. But over here on the other side, Abdullah ibn Umar was, hitting his servants. So would the fire afflict Abdullah ibn Umar? Yes or no? Allahu A'lam. Good answer, excellent answer. The scholars say no. And the shurah, the ones who examine this hadith, they say no. Because in this situation, Allahu A'lam, that perhaps Abu Mas'ud was doing it in a manner of anger and not disciplining. Okay? And probably, perhaps it had to do with something that is not associated with the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That this servant was being hit for something that does not have to do with a sin, but rather perhaps he disobeyed his master. And so in return, perhaps Abu Mas'ud, out of anger, he was striking him. And this is the part where we should not use to strike our servants if we had any servants. It's in this area. if they did, if they angered us because, for example, they did not obey our orders, or they have done something that is wrong, we do not hit them in this area. However, it's only the area of perhaps permissible to hit them, that it's the major sins. Is this clear to everybody? Okay, good. Alhamdulillah. Now, from this hadith, you also see that the kafara, the only way to alleviate yourself from the hellfire, to be afflicted, if you had fallen into this and you have stricken a servant in a time or for something that he does not deserve to be stricken, that you must free him. Not nothing, I say mandatory, right? But in order to keep away from being punished and to alleviate and erase that sin, you should free your slave. Because also we learned from the other hadith that Prophet ﷺ had said that for every ligament, right, that has been freed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would free that ligament from you from the hellfire. So for every arm, it's an arm. For every leg, it's a leg. An eye for an eye, a head for an head, an ear an ear. So by freeing the slave, right, he has freed himself and his limbs from being punished. Now, the only way you will be sure that your servant is not upset with you anymore for what you have done is that if you had freed him. Wallahu a'lam. Inshallah, we'll stop here. Subhanallah wa bihamdik.